The province of Maryland had been a loyal English colony since 1632. But in 1765, the first sign of rebellion occurred when Zachariah Hood, whose job it was to collect the duty payable under the new Stamp Act, was attacked by an angry mob in Annapolis and had to flee to New York for his life. After a decade of internal strife, Maryland declared itself a sovereign state, signing the Declaration of Independence in 1776. An early passionate voice for independence in Maryland was the planter Charles Carroll of Carrollton. Carroll's position in revolutionary politics emerged in 1773 when he published a series of letters in the Maryland Gazette, advocating for freedom of conscience and the rights of an elected assembly versus the powers of appointed government, based on the principle that the people are the true foundation of government. Along with Samuel Chase, William Packer, and Thomas Stone, Carroll became one of the four signers of the Declaration of Independence from Maryland, and the only Roman Catholic to do so. But support for independence in Maryland was not unanimous. Many Marylanders either actively supported the Crown or rejected violence as a means of redress. One such loyalist was Annapolis Mayor Daniel Delaney the Younger. Although Delaney was a fervent opponent of the Stamp Act of 1765, he argued in favor of peaceful protest. In his pamphlet titled Considerations on the Propriety of Imposing Taxes in the British Colonies, Delaney argued that there may be a time when redress may not be obtained. Till then, I shall recommend a legal, orderly, and prudent resentment. From 1632 on, when King Charles I granted the Charter of Maryland to Cecil Calvert, 2nd Baron Baltimore, the province offered agricultural opportunities to settlers. Although tobacco quickly emerged as the dominant crop and represented 40% of colonial exports from the Upper South, soil exhaustion prompted diversification into wheat and grains by the mid-18th century. Initially, indentured labor provided the primary source for Maryland's agricultural workforce. But by the late 17th century, planters shifted to importing enslaved Africans for its cost advantages in perpetual labor. And as Maryland shifted from agriculture to industry, such as ironworking, enslaved Africans could be relied upon for the iron-making skills they brought from their native countries. In Africa, the iron-making culture was guided by rules on marital relations, supernatural forces, and the obligations of the living to their deceased ancestors, who had the power to assure success or failure in any enterprise. Smelting operations were carried out far from villages, required special protective charms and medicines, and were restricted to individuals with specialized training. To them, the furnace was a fertile young woman, to whom all male iron workers were betrothed, who gave birth to the iron that the deceased ancestors had blessed. By 1754, there were 7 furnaces and 8 forges in Maryland, increasing by 1758 to 8 furnaces and 10 forges, producing 2,500 long tons of pig iron and 600 long tons of bar iron annually. By the time of the American Revolution, there were 14 furnaces and 17 or 18 forges. Through the Iron Act of 1750, Parliament sought to preserve Britain's colonial market for her industrial products by directing the colonies, primarily Maryland and Virginia, to limit their production to raw materials for British manufacturers. American colonists eventually resented that they were forced to supply Britain with the pig and bar iron, while they had to purchase finished iron products from British manufacturers. When Thomas and James Johnson, along with their brothers Roger and Baker, began operating Catoctin Furnace in 1776, they originally set out to produce pig iron. You will meet Thomas and James in our story. Thomas Johnson Jr., born in Calvert County, Maryland in 1732, was elected the first non-colonial governor of Maryland in 1777. The pinnacle of his illustrious public career was his appointment as an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court in 1791, on which he served until early 1793, when he resigned, citing poor health. In 1795, President Washington offered to nominate Johnson for Secretary of State, based on Thomas Jefferson's recommendation, but Johnson declined. James Johnson was the most likely of the four Johnson brothers to become instrumental in the development of Catoctin Furnace. Unlike his three brothers, all of whom were trained in the law, James was a skilled ironmaster who may have learned his trade at Snowden's Iron Works on Little Patuxent River near the Johnson family home. When his brother Thomas became involved in the iron-making venture at Green Spring Furnace near Fort Frederick, James became its ironmaster. When Catoctin Furnace began operations in 1776, the Johnson brothers were staunch patriots. Thomas was elected Brigadier General of Maryland's Upper District, and James was attached to the 2nd Battalion as a colonel. Because of their involvement in the iron industry, the Continental Army soon began to approach the Johnsons about producing munitions. But Thomas and James were reluctant to commit to producing weapons, fearing that the quality of their iron may not be appropriate. For 4 years, the furnace produced salt pans, stove plates, tools, weights, and utensils. Our story centers around the turning point in production when the furnace began to produce armaments for the war effort. In the fall of 1780, the Johnsons committed to manufacturing 31 tons of 10-inch shells until October 15, 1780, to be delivered by wagon to the Continental Quartermaster in Baltimore town. Our story tells of the struggle during the last 3 days leading up to that deadline, as white and enslaved black iron workers raced to meet that goal. You will meet General David Poe, the Assistant Deputy Quartermaster General of Baltimore, who certified that he took delivery of 31 tons of shells. The shells were fired during the decisive Battle of Yorktown in the fall of 1781. The Johnsons were never paid for their shells. Another historical character you'll meet in our story is Brother Johann Friedrich Schlegel, a pastor in the Moravian Church who tended not only to German settlers, but also to the enslaved African population at the furnace. We know much about Brother Schlegel from the detailed diaries he kept during his pastorate. The final, and perhaps most fascinating historical character is Andrew, an enslaved African iron worker. Surprisingly, we know much about the man who was born Ofodobendo Wuma in what is modern-day Nigeria, because he was eventually baptized and welcomed into the Moravian congregation at Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where, true to Moravian custom, the story of his remarkable life was committed to paper. Fictional characters based on historical people include Rachel, Andrew's daughter, and Isaac, Rachel's son. Millie, who was born Eseosa and who brought her ironworking skills from her native Africa. Samuel, an enslaved man. Jeremiah Bolts, the furnace's founder responsible for the quality of the iron. His job was to keep the furnace blowing at peak efficiency. Thomas Addison, his childhood friend and loyalist spy. Joseph Böhringer, the keeper who helped the founder monitor the furnace and work the night shift. And finally, Brother Schlegel's son Johann, who returns from Bethlehem with the news that Pennsylvania will abolish slavery. As Catoctin Furnace, like our country, celebrates its 250th birthday, we are excited to bring its fascinating history to life for you with site-specific theater that allows you to immerse yourself in the daily lives of people who lived 2.5 centuries ago. As research continues, new facts are uncovered. Just earlier this year, we discovered that in July of 1781, Catoctin Furnace manufactured cannon for the Revolutionary War effort. We hope you will enjoy Iron Will, and that you will return to Catoctin Furnace to enjoy our ongoing cultural and historical events, including future theatrical productions that invite you to immerse yourself in the furnace's exciting history.